Hey, welcome to my channel. This is where I share my thoughts, my creativity, and the things I'm passionate about. If you want to see more real and original content, make sure to subscribe and be part of the journey. The night my husband called me a nobody from nowhere in front of his entire office, I didn't cry. I didn't storm out. I stood very still, holding a glass of champagne I hadn't touched, and I thought about what my father used to say when I was small. Maya, still water runs deep. Remember that. I never fully understood what he meant until that evening. My name is Maya. I'm 36 years old. I've been an architect for 11 years, the kind who works quietly, takes on mid-size residential projects, drives a sensible car, and lives in a house that doesn't announce anything about her. I married my husband, Daniel, when I was 29. He was charming, then the kind of charming that feels like sunlight when you're inside it, and only later, when you're standing outside looking back through the glass, do you realize how small the room actually was. Daniel works in corporate finance. He structures deals, manages portfolios, moves money between places where money likes to gather. He is very good at it. He has always been very aware of how good he is at it. I loved him. I want to be clear about that, because nothing that comes later makes sense unless you understand that I genuinely loved the man I married. I loved his laugh, his confidence, the way he remembered small details about people he met only once. I loved how he held my hand when we walked into rooms together, like he was proud to have me beside him. But confidence, left unexamined, can quietly become something else. It happened gradually, the way a house settles one small crack in the plaster, then another, until one day you look up and realize the ceiling has been shifting for years. He started correcting me in front of others. Small things at first. Maya, that's not quite right. Or, she has a tendency to exaggerate. He said these things with a soft smile, the kind that made people around us assume it was affectionate. It wasn't. He began treating my work as a hobby. When I mentioned a project I was proud of, he would nod the way you nod at a child showing you a finger painting. When I earned a contract with a firm in Charlotte, the largest of my career at the time, he said, "That's sweet, honey," and went back to his phone. I told myself it wasn't serious. I told myself every marriage has friction. I told myself I was being too sensitive. My mother called me every Sunday. She had a way of asking questions that weren't quite questions. "Are you happy, Maya?" she would say. And I would say yes. And there would be a pause. Just long enough to mean something. My father called less often. He was never a big phone person. When we did speak, he mostly asked about my work, my projects, the neighborhoods I was designing for. He listened the way engineers listen carefully, without interrupting. My father was a quiet man who fixed things around his small house in Asheville, drove a 10-year-old pickup truck, and seemed entirely content with a simple life. I did not know then what I know now about my father. Actually, that is not entirely true. I knew fragments. I knew he had worked in development before I was born, that he had traveled extensively in his 30s and 40s, that he had a network of old friends, who called him occasionally from international numbers. I knew he had paid for my entire architecture degree without blinking, even when I worried about the cost. I knew that when I mentioned money being tight in the early years of my marriage, he would quietly deposit something into my account before I'd finished the sentence. But I had never asked directly. My father had a way of closing certain doors so gently that you didn't notice they were closed at all. And I suppose I had accepted the version of him that was easiest to hold, a retired man, modest, content, a little mysterious in the way that fathers sometimes are. Daniel had met my father 3 times before our wedding. He found him pleasant but unimpressive. "Good man," he said afterward. "Simple. But good." I remember the word simple sitting in my chest like a splinter. We were married 7 years when the Hargrove and Sloan dinner happened. Hargrove and Sloan is one of the most prestigious financial consultancy firms in the Southeast. Daniel had been positioning himself for a senior partnership for 2 years. The annual gala at their Charlotte offices was, in his words, the most important evening of my professional life. He said this to me 3 times in the week before the event. I understood what he was asking: look beautiful, say little, reflect well on him. I wore a navy dress. I had my hair done. I stood beside my husband and shook hands with people whose names I memorized and whose eyes slid past me to Daniel with the focused energy of people who calculate worth on contact. For the first hour, I was fine. I made conversation. I was warm and composed and asked the right questions. I realize now, performing the role I had slowly been assigned in our marriage: decorative, supportive, invisible. Then came the moment. We were standing with three of Daniel's colleagues' senior partners, a woman named Patricia Ellison who ran the firm's Southeast division, and two men whose names I have chosen to forget. When someone asked how Daniel and I had met, I began to answer. We met in Charleston, actually, she was working a small renovation project nearby, Daniel said over me, smooth as water. I found her wandering around a job site. He said it with a laugh, the warm kind, the kind designed to make everyone in the circle laugh along with him. They did. I held my smile. Patricia Ellison looked at me with what I think was genuine curiosity. Are you in construction? Architecture, I said. Maya has a small practice, Daniel said, as though he were telling someone I had a vegetable garden. Mostly residential. Nothing major. He swirled his drink. She's from a very small town originally, Asheville. You know how it is: good people, simple background. I always say she married up. He laughed again. Nobody laughed that time. The silence lasted perhaps 2 seconds. But 2 seconds of silence in a room full of people who calculate social temperatures for a living is an eternity. I felt the heat rise from my collarbone to my jaw. I felt the way the words "married up" landed on me, in front of Patricia Ellison and those two men and the circling staff with their trays of champagne. I felt 7 years of small corrections and gentle dismissals and soft, that sweet, honey pile behind my sternum all at once. And then something shifted. Later I would not be able to explain it precisely. But I felt the still water my father had always talked about. I felt it rise. I turned to Daniel. I looked at him directly, the way I had not looked at him in a long time. I think, I said, slowly and clearly enough that everyone in our small circle could hear me, that you should be careful about what you assume you know about where I come from. Daniel's smile flickered. Just for a moment. Maya. I mean it kindly, I said. I picked up my champagne glass, which I had been holding untouched for 40 minutes, and I took a slow sip. But I do mean it. Patricia Ellison looked at me with what I can only describe as quiet interest. I excused myself politely and walked to the balcony. Outside, the Charlotte skyline was lit and enormous and indifferent. I stood at the railing and breathed the April air and felt my hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the release of pressure that had been building for longer than I wanted to admit. My phone rang. The screen said Dad. I stared at it for a moment. My father almost never called in the evening. I answered. Hey, sweetheart. His voice was calm, low, exactly as it always was. How's the dinner? I stopped. How did you know I was at a dinner? A brief pause. You mentioned it last week, remember? The big firm event. I had mentioned it. I exhaled. It's fine, Dad. Daniel just said something. I caught myself. I had never told my father the full shape of things with Daniel. Some part of me had always protected that information, maybe to protect myself from having to see it clearly. It was nothing. Another pause. Longer. Maya, my father said. Did he disrespect you? The question was so direct that it took the breath out of me. I started. He made a comment. In front of his colleagues. About my background. About us. Silence. When my father spoke again, his voice was the same. But there was something underneath it that I had never heard before. Something that was not quite anger, because it was too measured for anger. It was more like the sound of a decision being made. I see, he said. Enjoy the rest of your evening, sweetheart. I love you. He hung up. I stood on the balcony for another few minutes, watching the city lights, and then I went back inside and stood beside my husband for the rest of the event and spoke to no one about what had just happened. Daniel was quiet in the car home. I was quieter. When we arrived, he said, You embarrassed me tonight, and I said, I know. And went upstairs. I did not sleep much. For the next 5 days, nothing unusual happened on the surface. Daniel went to work. I managed 2 ongoing projects. We coexisted in the house with the careful choreography of people who have stopped expecting warmth from each other but have not yet named that fact out loud. On the 6th day, my father called again. Maya, I want to come see you, he said. This weekend, if that's all right. It was unusual. My father was not a spontaneous visitor. He lived 2 hours away and planned his trips with the same quiet precision he applied to everything. Of course, I said. Is everything okay? Everything's fine, he said. I just want to see you. He arrived Saturday afternoon in his old pickup truck, carrying a bag of apples from a farm stand he liked and wearing the same kind of flannel shirt he always wore. He hugged me for a long time on the porch. He shook Daniel's hand without particular warmth, and Daniel offered him a seat in the living room with the performance of a man who considers himself a generous host. They sat across from each other, and I brought out coffee, and there was a few minutes of surface conversation that felt like two weather systems making polite contact before something atmospheric happened. Then my father set down his mug, laced his fingers together, and looked at Daniel with the specific, unhurried focus of a man who has run boardrooms and has never needed to raise his voice to empty them. My daughter tells me you made a comment about her background, he said. At your firm's event. Daniel's expression shifted. Sir, I think that's... I'm not angry, my father said. I want to be clear about that. I'm not here as an angry man. I'm here because there are some things you don't know, and I think you deserve to know them before you continue making decisions based on incomplete information. Daniel glanced at me. I said nothing. I had no idea where this was going. My father reached into the inside pocket of his flannel shirt, which should tell you something about my father, that he keeps documents in the breast pocket of a flannel shirt as though it is the most natural thing in the world, and placed a business card on the coffee table. He slid it toward Daniel. Daniel picked it up. I watched his face. The card read, Robert Callahan, Chairman Emeritus, Callahan Development Group. I retired 4 years ago, my father said. Mostly. I still sit on 3 boards. I maintain a development portfolio across 7 states. The firm I founded before Maya was born currently manages assets valued at approximately $2.3 billion. I kept this quiet intentionally because I wanted Maya to build her own life and her own identity without the weight of what I'd built casting a shadow over her. The room was very quiet. The house you live in, my father continued, still in the same unhurried tone, is on land I own. The mortgage you hold is through a lending institution where I sit on the advisory board. The Hargrove and Sloan Gala you attended last week, Franklin Hargrove and I have been professional acquaintances for 22 years. I had lunch with him on Thursday. Daniel's face had gone the color of new concrete. I'm not telling you this as a threat, my father said. I want to be genuinely clear about that. I'm telling you this because you called my daughter nobody. You told a room full of people she married up, and I think it's important that you understand from a position of complete information exactly how wrong you were. He picked up his coffee. He drank it. He set it down. What happens next in your marriage is between you and Maya, he said. That's not my decision to make. But I wanted you to know who you were talking about when you talked about my daughter. Daniel said nothing for a very long time. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its usual confidence in the way a structure loses integrity, not all at once, but definitively. I didn't know, he said. I know you didn't, my father said. That's why I'm here. He stood up, straightened his flannel shirt, and looked at me with the quietest, steadiest love I have ever been on the receiving end of. Walk me out? On the porch, he hugged me again and smelled like wood shavings and coffee and the farm stand apples. I held on longer than I expected to. I should have said something sooner, I said into his shoulder. You said exactly what you needed to say, when you needed to say it, he told me. That night on the balcony what you said to him before you walked away. That was you, Maya. Not me. That was all you. He got in his truck. He drove away. I stood on the porch until the red of his taillights disappeared. In the days that followed, the world Daniel had constructed around himself began to shift in ways that had nothing to do with my father's direct intervention and everything to do with the fact that my father had spent 40 years building relationship with the people whose opinions Daniel had staked his entire identity on. Franklin Hargrove called Daniel into his office on Monday. I don't know exactly what was said. Daniel did not tell me, and I did not ask. But when he came home that evening, the architecture of his face had changed. The easy certainty was gone. In its place was something I had never seen on my husband before. Humility that had not been chosen but arrived. He sat across from me at the kitchen table that night and said, I have been unkind to you. I looked at him for a long moment. Yes, I said. I didn't realize. I know you didn't realize who my father was, I said. But Daniel, none of it should have depended on who my father is. You were unkind to me before you knew. That's the part that matters. He was quiet. I've been thinking about that for a long time, I said. The version of me you've been married to these past few years, the one who drives the sensible car and runs the small practice and came from the simple background, she was real. She is real. And she deserved better than what you gave her. The silence between us was very different from the silence of the car ride home from the gala. That silence had been defensive, self-protective. This one was honest. I did not make a decision that night. Marriage is not a single night's decision, and I have never believed in dramatic ultimatums. What I did was finally, clearly, for the first time in too long, stop performing the role I had been assigned and simply exist as the person I actually was. Over the following weeks, I had several conversations with my father that I should have had years before. He told me things about Callahan Development Group that I had never asked and he had never volunteered. He told me about the early years, the risks, the partnerships that failed, and the ones that built the company into what it became. He told me that he and my mother had made a deliberate choice to raise me without the weight of that world, to let me find my own footing. To see whether I could build something with my own hands, before I ever needed to know about his. Did you worry, I asked him once, that keeping it from me was its own kind of deception? He thought about this seriously, the way he thinks about everything. Yes, he said. I still do. Sometimes. There's no perfect answer. But I watched you become an architect. I watched you take a piece of land and a client's half-formed idea, and turn it into a place where people would actually live their lives. You did that. Entirely. That was yours. I didn't want to take that from you by making it easy. I understood. I didn't agree with every choice he'd made. But I understood. My practice is not small anymore. After the events of that spring, 2 of my father's associates reached out not because he told them to, I learned later, but because Patricia Ellison mentioned me to people she knew, the way well-connected people quietly redirect attention when they've seen something worth noticing. I brought on 2 junior architects in September. We are currently designing a mixed-use development in Asheville, my father's city, as it turns out, where he still has more history than his flannel shirts would suggest. Daniel and I are no longer married. That is the honest conclusion, and I think it is the right one. The separation was quiet, as things tend to be when 2 people finally tell each other the truth. There was no explosion, no dramatic confrontation, no teams of lawyers descending. Just 2 people acknowledging that what we had built together had not been built on the right foundation, and that continuing to live inside it would not fix the structure. He called me once, about 3 months after. He said he had been in therapy. He said he understood things now that he hadn't understood then. I told him I was glad, and I meant it, because I do not believe in wishing difficulty on people, not even people who have been difficult to me. I wished him well. I meant that, too. What I carry from all of it is not bitterness, and it is not triumph. I am not interested in being a woman who defines herself by a wound or by a victory. What I carry is something much quieter, and much harder to name, a kind of clarity about who I am that I could not have arrived at without going through exactly the things I went through. I think about what my father said on the porch. That was you, Maya. Not me. That was all you. He was talking about a single sentence on a balcony. But I think he meant something larger. He meant that the still water had always been there. He meant that the depth was always mine. He just waited with the patience of a man who builds things across decades until I found it. My mother still calls every Sunday. Now, when she asks, "Are you happy, Maya?" the pause that follows is different. It is not the pause of something avoided. It is just the pause of someone who wants to answer honestly, and takes a moment to make sure she does. Yes, I tell her. And I mean it in a way I did not know I was capable of. Back in the house with the settling walls and the untouched champagne glass and the Charlotte skyline spread out indifferent and enormous beyond the balcony railing. Still water runs deep. My father was right about that. He usually is.
They say just forget. Move on like it's easy. But forgetting you feels like remembering someone I've never seen. I've been trying to erase you from the places in my mind, but the harder that I fight it, the more you're hard to leave behind. Every memory keeps slipping, Through the cracks I try to close, like a face I should remember, but somehow never know. Forgetting you feels impossible, like chasing something I can't hold, like trying to remember someone that I've never even known. I keep reaching through the silence for a past I can't undo, 'cause letting go of what we had feels like losing something true. Every moment turns to fragments, every thought just fades to blue, like I'm searching for a feeling that still only leads to you. Forgetting you feels impossible, like chasing something I can't hold, like trying to remember someone that I've never even known. I keep reaching through the silence for a past I can't undo, 'cause letting go of what we had feels like losing something true. If I never met you, maybe I would know just how to heal, but now every empty moment still reminds me what is real. Forgetting you feels impossible, like chasing something I can't hold, like trying to remember someone that I've never even known. I keep reaching through the silence for a past I can't undo, 'cause letting go of what we had feels like losing something true. I'm freezing, I'm bleeding, slowly fading away. But don't worry, I'm fine. The cold has settled in my heartbeat, like winter living in my veins. Every breath feels numb and fragile, every smile just hides the pain. I'm breaking quietly in silence, falling slow without a sound. Yet I keep saying I'm okay, while my world burns to the ground. I'm frozen here, I'm bleeding slowly, dying piece by piece inside. But I still whisper, it's alright, just to keep you from goodbye. I'm shattered, love, but don't you worry, I'll pretend till my last breath. Even while my soul is fading, I'll say everything's okay. Maybe pain just learned to live here, maybe sorrow feels like home. So I wear my wounds like armor and survive them all alone. I'm frozen here, I'm bleeding slowly, dying piece by piece inside. But I still whisper, it's alright, just to keep you from goodbye. I'm shattered, love, but don't you worry, I'll pretend till my last breath. Even while my soul is fading, I'll say everything's okay. If you ever see me smiling, no, it's just my last defense. 'Cause sometimes love means hiding how much you're suffering. No, I'm frozen here, I'm bleeding slowly, dying piece by piece inside. But I still whisper, it's alright, just to keep you from goodbye. I'm shattered, love, but don't you worry, I'll pretend till my last breath. Even while my soul is fading, I'll say everything's okay. It's okay.